For the first time in modern history, the world's two largest powers are moving in opposite directions, quietly, strategically, and faster than most people realize. On one side is the United States, the architect of the current world order. On the other is China, the rising force reshaping the next one. And while headlines focus on elections, scandals, and short-term noise, a silent power shift is unfolding beneath the surface, one that will redefine global leadership for decades. Living here in New York, you can feel the tension without anyone having to say it. Markets move differently, conversations feel heavier. Investors, workers, and everyday people sense that something fundamental is changing. And they're right, because what we're witnessing is not just a rivalry, it's the transition between two stages of the global cycle, a moment every major empire has faced, from the Dutch to the British and now the Americans. Only this time the scale is larger and the speed is faster. Before we go deeper, let me speak directly to you. If you're still here, listening carefully, it means you're not like most people. You don't want shallow explanations, you want clarity, you want truth, and you want to understand the forces shaping your future. People like you are rare, and rare people need rare information. So if you want to stay ahead of this historic shift, consider subscribing, not for me, but for yourself. Now let's continue. America and China represent two different phases of the same long-term pattern. America is the established power, wealthy, influential, innovative, but under internal pressure. China is the rising power, disciplined, ambitious, rapidly growing, and internally unified around a long-term vision. These trajectories are not random. They follow the same sequence Ray Dalio identified across 500 years of history. Every dominant empire begins with education, innovation, productivity, global trade, and military strength. That is how the United States became the center of finance, culture, technology, and global leadership. But every system that rises eventually overextends. Debt increases, internal division grows, political noise becomes louder than national purpose, and slowly the economic engine that once drove growth begins to slow. These forces don't appear suddenly, they build quietly over decades. At the same time, a rising power begins strengthening itself. China has spent the last 40 years doing exactly what every emerging empire does at the beginning of its big cycle, investing heavily in manufacturing, infrastructure, technology, education, and long-term national planning. The results are visible everywhere. 40 years ago, China produced almost nothing. Today, it produces more than the United States, Europe, and Japan combined and in many sectors. It graduates more engineers every year than the entire Western world. It dominates global supply chains, and it is now challenging America in the two most important arenas of the future, technology and finance. But the power shift between nations is rarely loud. It is rarely dramatic. It happens quietly through trade agreements, technology standards, global investments, currency deals, and international influence. America built the world's institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, the dollar system. China is now building alternatives, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, regional currency swaps, and global partnerships from Africa to South America. This is the silent shift reshaping the world order. If this perspective is making things clearer, pause for a moment. People who understand the world at this level are rare. Most people will see the effects of this shift only when it's too late to adapt, but you don't have to be one of them. So stay connected, subscribe, and let's move forward. Now let's look at why this shift matters so much. Because global power does not change peacefully. It changes through friction, economic friction, technological rivalry, diplomatic pressure, military tension. The US and China are already locked in this cycle. Tariff wars, semiconductor restrictions, currency battles, military posturing, these are early signs of a deeper shift taking place. They are not the conflict itself. They are the symptoms of a transition between two stages of the global hierarchy. America still holds enormous power, military reach, cultural dominance, technological leadership, and the world's reserve currency. But China is now close enough to challenge that position. And history shows that when a rising power approaches the level of a reigning one, the world enters its most unstable period. The Dutch faced this with Britain. Britain faced it with Germany. And now America faces it with China. The question isn't whether the world is changing. The question is how fast and how prepared you are to understand what comes next. When two great powers move in opposite directions, the world naturally becomes unstable. America is still the world's strongest military force, the center of global finance, and the birthplace of much of the world's technology, but it is also facing internal pressures, rising debt, political polarization, declining trust in institutions, and a widening gap between those who are thriving and those who are struggling. These forces weaken nations from the inside long before external rivals can challenge them. History shows that no empire collapses because it loses a war outside. It collapses because it loses cohesion inside. China, on the other hand, is moving through the phase of rapid ascent that every rising power experiences. The country is unified around long-term goals: industrial dominance, technological leadership, economic expansion, and global influence. It is building alliances through infrastructure, trade, and investment instead of ideology. And it has become the world's factory, the world's banker, and increasingly the world's engineer. In fields like AI, 5G, solar energy, drones, electric vehicles, and manufacturing, China has already surpassed the United States, but this transition is quiet. It doesn't happen through speeches, it happens through numbers, through production capacity, through trade deals, through education, through technology adoption. The financial dimension of this power shift might be the most important one. The US dollar has been the backbone of global trade since World War II. But China is now negotiating oil purchases in yuan, launching digital currency systems, and building infrastructure that binds nations into long-term economic dependency. This doesn't replace the dollar overnight, but it signals something deeper. The world is beginning to diversify away from a single leadership model. And financial shifts always precede political ones. If you're watching this carefully, you already understand something most people don't. World orders don't change because of ideology. They change because of productivity, debt cycles, and long-term competitiveness. And by those measures, the power gap between America and China is shrinking faster than expected. But this doesn't guarantee China wins or America loses. History is not a boxing match. It's a long-term competition of discipline, innovation, adaptation, and unity. America still has enormous strengths: creativity, freedom, entrepreneurship, immigration, capital markets, world-class universities, and unmatched military capability. These are not small assets. These are the reasons America rose to the top in the first place. The challenge now is not whether America has advantages. It does. The challenge is whether America can use those advantages fast enough to adapt to a world that has fundamentally changed. If you're still here, listening with full focus, let me say this. People like you, who seek understanding instead of noise, are rare, and rare people shape their future instead of being shaped by it. So if you want to stay ahead of this massive transition, consider subscribing, not for entertainment, but for clarity, so you're not surprised by events that are entirely predictable. Stay connected, and let's explore this together. Now let's answer the real question: what does the future world order actually look like? It may not look like the system we grew up with. It may not be a single superpower dominating the world. It may be a world divided into spheres, America leading the West, China leading Asia, and other nations aligning based on economic interest rather than ideological loyalty. Power may be distributed rather than concentrated. Influence may come from technology rather than territory. And the countries that understand data, energy, supply chains, and artificial intelligence will shape the future far more than those with the largest armies. The most realistic outcome is not a war, but a split, a world that gradually divides into two digital economic and political ecosystems, one orbiting the United States, the other orbiting China. Trade networks, currency systems, technology standards, and alliances will slowly reorganize along these lines. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens quietly through treaties, investments, and strategic partnerships. But once the structure locks in, it becomes very difficult to reverse. So what does this mean for you? It means your future, your career, your investments, your opportunities will be shaped by a global system that is no longer dominated by one worldview. It means the industries that dominate today may fade and new ones will rise. It means countries will compete not just on military power, but on innovation, education, energy, and digital infrastructure. And it means the rules that worked in the past will not necessarily work in the future. The silent power shift between America and China is not just a geopolitical story. It is a defining moment in the long-term cycle of human history, a moment that will decide how wealth, power, and opportunity are distributed for generations. Most people will ignore the signs until the consequences are unavoidable, but you don't have to. You can understand the pattern before the rest of the world wakes up to it. The world order is being reshaped right now, quietly, strategically, and faster than anyone expected. What happens in the next 10 to 20 years will define the world for the next 50, and the people who prepare today will be the ones who lead tomorrow. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but its rhythm never changes. You are living inside that rhythm right now. And the question you must ask yourself is simple. Will you adapt with the new world or be left behind by it?